This video is made for entertainment purposes only. My name is Marcus Reed, and I haven't flown a plane in 23 years. Not because I crashed. Not because I lost my nerve. But because on September 14, 2001, 3 days after the towers fell, I flew over something I wasn't supposed to see. Something the government had been watching for decades. Something they were actively trying to destroy. I saw hundreds of them, standing in a circle, in the middle of the Canadian wilderness. A gathering so vast, so organized, that it shattered everything I thought I knew about the world. They called it a peace summit, and they made sure I'd never fly again to keep it secret. This is my story. And it's time someone finally heard it. September 2001 was a strange time to be alive. The world had just watched the Twin Towers collapse on live television. America was reeling, angry, confused. Borders tightened. Airspace restrictions went into effect overnight. Everyone was looking at the sky differently. Suspicious, fearful. I was a bush pilot operating out of Fort Nelson, British Columbia. Had been for 16 years. I flew supplies to remote mining camps, geological survey teams, hunters, researchers, anyone who needed to get deep into the northern Rockies where roads didn't reach. It was honest work. Quiet work. The kind where you see more caribou than people, and that suited me just fine. I'd grown up in Alaska, learned to fly from my father, who'd learned from his. 3 generations of pilots, all of us drawn to the empty places. My dad used to say that the wilderness has a language, and if you're quiet enough, it'll teach you how to listen. I learned to listen. I learned the mountains, the weather patterns, the game trails visible from the air. I learned where the wolves denayed, where the grizzlies fished, where the moose gathered in summer. I learned to read the land like a second language. But there were places even I didn't go. Every pilot in the region knew about them. Unofficial no-fly zones. Stretches of wilderness where your instruments would go haywire, where radio contact would drop, where you'd feel a pressure in your chest that told you to turn around. We didn't talk about it much. We just respected it. Old-timers called them quiet zones. Native guides called them the old places. The government called them restricted airspace due to magnetic anomalies. We all knew that was bullshit. Something lived in those mountains. Something that had always been there. And the unspoken rule was simple. Stay out, and it stays hidden. I followed that rule for 16 years. Until September 14, 2001. It started with a phone call at 4:47 in the morning. I remember the exact time because the world still felt fragile, and every unexpected sound made your heart skip. I'd been sleeping restlessly anyway, like everyone else in those days, so when my satellite phone rang, I was awake before the second ring. Marcus Reed. The voice was clipped, professional, American. Speaking. This is Lieutenant Colonel Brian Hastings, Joint Task Force North. I'm calling on behalf of the Canadian Department of National Defense. We have an urgent charter request. I sat up, rubbing my face. Military charters weren't unusual, especially near the Alaska border, but the timing was odd. What kind of request? Geological Survey Team. Remote site in the northern Rockies. They've been out of contact for 36 hours. Weather's been bad, but it's clearing. We need someone who knows the terrain and can fly in low visibility conditions. Where's the site? A pause. Then, coordinates will be provided upon agreement. The location is sensitive. That word. Sensitive. I should have hung up right there. How sensitive? I asked. Mr. Reed, I'm authorized to offer you $15,000 for a single supply drop. You'll be flying Canadian government personnel and equipment. You'll follow a specific flight path. You will not deviate. You will not take photographs. You will not discuss this flight with anyone. Are we clear? $15,000 for a supply drop was insane. I usually charged $1,200 for a full-day charter. Why me? I asked. Another pause. Longer this time. Because you have a reputation for discretion. And because you've flown in that region before without incident. The way he said it made my skin crawl. Like he knew exactly where I'd been. Like he'd been watching. "I need to think about it," I said. "You have 30 seconds, Mr. Reed. After that, we'll call someone else." I thought about my father. About the old places. About the unspoken rule. I thought about $15,000. "What time?" I said. "Wheels up at 0700. Fort Nelson Regional Airport. Gate C." He hung up. I sat in the dark for a long time, listening to the wind outside my cabin, feeling that pressure in my chest that meant I was about to make a mistake. But I got dressed anyway. Gate C wasn't really a gate. It was a maintenance hangar on the military side of the airport, away from civilian traffic. When I arrived at 6:30, there were already 3 black SUVs parked outside, all with government plates. A man in a dark suit met me at the door. Not military. Something else. "Marcus Reed." I nodded. "ID, please." I handed over my pilot's license and passport. He scanned them with a handheld device, checked something on a tablet, then handed them back. "Come with me." Inside the hangar, my plane, a de Havilland Beaver I'd owned for 8 years, was already being loaded with equipment. Heavy cases, unmarked. A fuel truck was topping off my tanks. 3 men in Canadian Forces uniforms were supervising, but they weren't doing the loading. That was being done by civilian contractors who wouldn't make eye contact. The man in the suit led me to a folding table where a detailed topographic map was spread out. Another man was waiting there, older, maybe 60, with the kind of face that had seen too much and stopped reacting years ago. "Mr. Reed," he said without offering his hand. "I'm Dr. Raymond Pritchard, Natural Resources Canada. You'll be flying me and my assistant to a research site approximately 200 kilometers north-northwest of here." He pointed to a spot on the map. It was deep in the mountains, nowhere near any established camps or settlements. Right in the heart of one of the quiet zones. "That's restricted airspace," I said. "Not today it isn't," Pritchard replied. "You've been granted temporary clearance. Follow this flight path exactly." He traced a route with his finger. "Do not deviate. Do not fly below 3,000 feet until you reach the landing zone. Do not circle the area. Drop us and the equipment, refuel from the supplies we're bringing, and return immediately via the same route." "What are you researching out there?" "That's classified." "What happens if I see something?" His eyes locked onto mine. Cold. Clinical. "You won't," he said. "But if you do, you'll forget it. Are we clear?" I should have walked away. Instead, I said, "Crystal." We took off at 7:14 a.m., 3 minutes behind schedule. The sky was overcast but stable. Ceiling at about 5,000 feet, visibility decent. Pritchard and his assistant, a younger man named Dr. Colin Marsh, sat in the back with the equipment, neither of them speaking. They wore headsets but kept their microphones off. The whole flight felt wrong from the start. For the first hour, everything was normal. I followed the designated flight path, staying at altitude, watching the mountains roll beneath me in endless waves of green and gray. The terrain grew rougher as we pushed north, the valleys deeper, the peaks sharper. No roads. No towns. Nothing but wilderness. Then, at about 8:30, something changed. My compass started drifting. Not wildly, just a slow, steady rotation that shouldn't have been happening. My GPS flickered once, twice, then stabilized but showed our position about half a kilometer off from where I knew we were. I'd felt this before. The quiet zones. "Dr. Pritchard," I said into the headset. "Instruments are acting up." "That's normal for this area," he replied. "Magnetic anomalies. Fly by visual reference. You'll be fine. You've been here before?" "Many times." "And what exactly are you studying?" Silence. I kept flying. At 9:05, we reached the drop zone, a narrow valley with a small clearing barely large enough for the beaver. I circled once, checking for obstacles, then made my approach. The landing was rough but clean. We touched down on uneven ground, and I taxied to a stop near a stand of old-growth spruce. Pritchard and Marsh climbed out immediately and started unloading equipment. I shut down the engine and stepped out to help, but Pritchard waved me off. "Stay with the plane," he said. "We'll be fast." They worked quickly, efficiently, moving the cases into the trees. I noticed they were setting up some kind of monitoring equipment. Cameras, maybe, or sensors. Hard to tell from a distance. That's when I saw the tracks. Huge. Barefoot. Human-shaped but easily twice the size of mine. Fresh. Leading from the clearing into the forest. My stomach dropped. "Dr. Pritchard," I called. "You need to see this." He glanced over, saw what I was looking at, and his face went blank. "Get back in the plane, Mr. Reed. Those are... Get back in the plane." His voice was ice. I backed toward the beaver, heart hammering, and that's when I heard it. A sound like nothing I'd ever heard before. Low. Resonant. Not quite a growl, not quite a voice. It came from the trees, from multiple directions at once, surrounding us. Pritchard and Marsh froze. And then they stepped out of the forest. 3 of them. Tall, 8, maybe 9 feet. Covered in dark hair. Faces almost human but not quite. Eyes that looked at me with intelligence, with intent, with something I couldn't name. Sasquatch. Real. Right in front of me. One of them made a sound, a series of low hoots and rumbles, and Pritchard responded. Not in English. In their language. He spoke their language. I stood there, rooted to the ground, as the largest of the 3 stepped forward and extended something toward Pritchard. A carved piece of wood, intricate, covered in symbols. Pritchard took it carefully, examined it, then nodded. The creatures turned and melted back into the forest without a sound. Pritchard walked back to me, his face unreadable. "We're done here," he said. "Let's go." I didn't speak during takeoff. I couldn't. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely grip the yoke. I'd just seen Sasquatch. Plural. And the government knew about them. Was working with them. Communicating with them. Everything I thought I knew about the world had just shattered. We climbed back to altitude, and I turned south, following the flight path back toward Fort Nelson. But I couldn't stop thinking about those tracks. About the way they'd appeared from the forest like ghosts. About the carved wood and Pritchard's calm, practiced response. How long had this been going on? At 10:42, about 30 minutes into the return flight, I saw it. A clearing. No, a valley. A huge, circular valley surrounded by peaks, hidden from casual view by the terrain. And in the center of that valley, hundreds of them. Sasquatch. Standing in concentric circles, like a council. At least 200, maybe more. All facing inward toward a central group of larger individuals. Some held staffs. Some wore what looked like woven garments. They were organized. Deliberate. This wasn't a random gathering. This was a meeting. My breath caught. "Mr. Reed." Pritchard's voice in my headset was sharp. "Maintain your course." I couldn't look away. "Mr. Reed. Do not deviate." I reached for my camera. An old Nikon I always kept in the cockpit for aerial photos. My hands moved on autopilot, raising it to the window, framing the shot. "Mr. Reed. Stop." I pressed the shutter. Click, click, click. 6 photos before Pritchard lunged forward from the back seat, grabbing my shoulder. "You just made a terrible mistake," he said. The rest of the flight was silent. Pritchard sat back in his seat, but I could feel his eyes boring into the back of my head. Marsh hadn't said a word since we'd taken off. The air in the cabin felt suffocating, thick with unspoken threats. I kept my hands steady on the controls, but my mind was racing. What had I just photographed? A Sasquatch council? A peace summit, like something out of a fantasy novel? And why did the government know about it? Why were they there? More importantly, why had Pritchard told me to stay on course? What was I not supposed to see? We landed at Fort Nelson at 11:53 a.m. Before I'd even shut down the engine, 2 more SUVs pulled up alongside the plane. Men in dark suits emerged, not military, not RCMP. Something else. Something federal. Pritchard climbed out first, spoke briefly with one of them, then pointed at me. My stomach dropped. "Mr. Reed," one of the suited men called as I stepped onto the tarmac. "Come with us, please. I need to secure my plane." "Your plane will be secured. Come with us. Now." It wasn't a request. They led me across the tarmac to a small office building I'd never been inside before, the kind of place that doesn't have signs on the door. Inside was a windowless room with a metal table, 2 chairs, and a camera in the corner. An interrogation room. The suited man sat across from me. Mid-40s, graying hair, the kind of face that never smiled. His ID badge said size, Canadian Security Intelligence Service. "My name is Agent Dufresne," he said. "You're not under arrest, Mr. Reed, but you are going to answer some questions. Do you understand? I want a lawyer." "You're not under arrest," he repeated. "You're here voluntarily as part of a national security briefing. However, if you refuse to cooperate, that status can change very quickly." I swallowed hard. "What do you want to know?" "During your flight this morning, did you deviate from your assigned flight path?" "No." "Did you photograph anything?" I hesitated. Just for a second. That was enough. Dufresne leaned forward. "Mr. Reed, I'm going to be very clear with you. What you saw today is classified under the Security of Information Act. Discussing it, photographing it, or even acknowledging it exists is a federal crime. So I'll ask you again, did you photograph anything?" My mouth was dry. "Yes." "Where is the camera?" "In my plane." He nodded to someone I couldn't see, and a moment later, another agent entered with my Nikon. They placed it on the table between us. Dufresne picked it up, removed the film canister, and set it beside the camera. "This film will be destroyed," he said, "along with any copies, backups, or records of today's flight. Your plane's instruments will be inspected and scrubbed. Your logbook will be amended. And you will sign a non-disclosure agreement that carries a penalty of 20 years in federal prison if violated. Are we clear?" "What were they doing out there?" I asked. "That's not your concern. I saw hundreds of them. It looked like Mr. Reed." His voice was a knife. "Stop talking." I stopped. He slid a folder across the table. Inside was a thick stack of legal documents, NDAs, security agreements, liability waivers. Pages and pages of dense legalese that all said the same thing. "Forget what you saw, or we'll bury you." "Sign," he said. I picked up the pen. And then I stopped. "What if I don't?" I asked. Dufresne's expression didn't change. "Then your pilot's license will be permanently revoked for violations of restricted airspace. Your plane will be seized as evidence in a national security investigation. Your bank accounts will be frozen pending a financial audit. And you will spend the next 6 months in a detention center while we determine whether you're a threat to Canadian sovereignty." He paused. "And after all that, you'll still sign. Because we don't give up, Mr. Reed. We just make your life unlivable until you cooperate." I believed him. I signed every page. When I was finished, Dufresne collected the documents, stood, and walked to the door. "One more thing," he said without turning around. "You're grounded. Effective immediately. Your license is suspended pending a safety review that will take approximately 6 to 8 weeks. Don't leave British Columbia. Don't contact the media. Don't talk to anyone about this. If you do, we'll know." He left. I sat alone in that room for another hour before someone finally escorted me out. They kept my plane. When I returned to the hangar, it was gone. "Maintenance inspection," they said. "You'll get it back when the review is complete." But I knew I wouldn't. I took a cab back to my cabin, sat on the porch with a glass of whiskey, and tried to make sense of what had just happened. Sasquatch were real. The government knew. They were communicating with them. And I just stumbled into something so big, so carefully hidden, that they were willing to destroy my life to keep it secret. But why? What was happening in that valley? I couldn't let it go. That night, I pulled out my backup logbook, the one I kept at home, not the official one in the plane. I wrote down everything I could remember. The coordinates, approximate, the time, the description of the valley, the concentric circles, the staffs, the garments. I sketched what I'd seen from memory. And then I started researching. The internet in 2001 wasn't what it is now, but it was enough. I started with Sasquatch sightings in northern British Columbia. There were hundreds, decades of reports from hunters, loggers, hikers, indigenous communities. Most were dismissed as hoaxes or misidentifications. But some weren't. I found patterns. Clusters of sightings that corresponded with the quiet zones. Areas where compasses failed, where radios went dead, where people reported feeling watched. The same areas where old-timers said not to go. Then I found something else. A declassified document from 1967, a Royal Canadian Mounted Police report about a wild man captured near Terrace, British Columbia. The file was heavily redacted, but the basics were there. A creature matching Sasquatch descriptions had been detained, studied, and then relocated to a federal research facility. Relocated. Not released. Not killed. Studied. They'd known for at least 34 years. I kept digging. I found references to Project Cascadia, a joint U.S.-Canadian research initiative established in 1972 to study indigenous megafauna in the Pacific Northwest. The public-facing mission was about wildlife conservation. But the budget was enormous, tens of millions of dollars, and the personnel list included cryptozoologists, linguists, anthropologists, and military advisors. Why would a wildlife conservation project need linguists? Unless they were talking to something. I found a reference to a Dr. Raymond Pritchard in a 1989 academic paper about interspecies communication. He'd been researching primate vocalizations and had received a grant from Natural Resources Canada shortly after. It was him. The same man who'd been in my plane. And then I found the satellite photos. It took some searching, public databases, university archives, amateur satellite trackers, but I found them. Low-resolution images from commercial satellites, dated September 12 to 14, 2001. The valley. Except in these images, there was something else. Heat signatures. Dozens of them, clustered in the same concentric circle pattern I'd seen. But there were more signatures at the edges of the valley. Military vehicles. Helicopters. Troops. They'd been watching the gathering. No, they'd been surrounding it. My blood ran cold. This wasn't observation. This was containment. Or preparation for something worse. On September 23, 9 days after the flight, someone knocked on my cabin door at 2 a.m. I woke instantly, heart pounding. No one came out this far without calling ahead. No one knocked at 2 a.m. unless something was very wrong. I grabbed the shotgun I kept by the bed and moved to the window. A man stood on my porch. Alone. No vehicle that I could see. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a heavy coat despite the mild weather. His face was obscured by shadow. "Marcus Reed," he called. His voice was deep, accented. "Not Canadian. Not American. I need to speak with you." "Go away," I shouted through the door. "I've got nothing to say." "You saw the gathering," he said. "You took photos. And now you're asking questions you shouldn't be asking." My grip tightened on the shotgun. "Who are you?" "Someone who knows what you're looking for. And someone who can tell you why it matters." I hesitated. "I'm unarmed," he said. "I came alone. If I wanted to hurt you, you'd already be dead." That wasn't comforting. But curiosity won. I opened the door, shotgun raised. The man stepped into the light, and I got my first clear look at him. Native features, Dean, maybe, or Carrier, with deep lines around his eyes and gray streaking his long black hair. He was older than I'd thought. 60, maybe older. And his eyes were tired. The kind of tired that comes from carrying something heavy for too long. "My name is Thomas Calakin," he said. "I'm a counselor with the Cascadena First Nation. And I've been trying to stop what's about to happen for the last 15 years. We sat at my kitchen table, the shotgun within reach, while Thomas told me a story that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. "They call themselves the Tsek," he began. "It means the hidden people in our old language. Your people call them Sasquatch or Bigfoot. But they're not monsters. They're not animals. They're people. They've lived in these mountains for thousands of years, long before Europeans came. Long before even my ancestors arrived. I saw them," I said. "I know they're real. But do you know what they're doing?" Thomas asked. "That gathering you saw, it wasn't random. It was a peace council. The first one in 50 years. "Peace council? Between who?" "Between clans," he said. "The Tsek aren't one tribe. They're many, spread across the entire Pacific Northwest. From Alaska to Northern California. Most of the time, they keep to their own territories. But sometimes, when something threatens all of them, they gather." "What's threatening them?" Thomas's face darkened. "Your government. And mine." He leaned forward. In the 1950s, after the war, both governments discovered the Tsek. At first, they tried to capture them, study them. That didn't work. The Tsek are too smart, too strong, too good at hiding. So they tried a different approach. They made contact. Peaceful contact. They promised protection, autonomy, coexistence. And for 40 years, it worked. The Tsek stayed hidden. The governments kept their secret. A few researchers, like Pritchard, were allowed limited access for study. Everyone was happy. What changed? "September 11th, Thomas said quietly. I stared at him. "After the towers fell, everything changed. Borders, security, surveillance. The old agreements didn't matter anymore. Suddenly, the military wanted to know everything about everyone, including the Tsek. They wanted genetic samples, population counts, territorial maps. They wanted to track them, tag them, control them. And the Tsek said no. The Tsek said no, Thomas confirmed. So the military started planning something else. Something worse. He pulled a folded map from his coat and spread it on the table. It showed the same valley I'd flown over, with markings and annotations. "This is where the Peace Council was held," he said, pointing. "The clans gathered to decide whether to fight back or to flee deeper into the wilderness. It was supposed to be secret, but the government found out, and they saw an opportunity." "What kind of opportunity?" Thomas looked me in the eye. "To eliminate them, all at once." My stomach turned. "That valley is surrounded by military positions," Thomas said. "Artillery, snipers, helicopter gunships. They were planning a massacre, Marcus. They were going to wipe out the entire Tsek leadership in one strike and call it a training accident." "That's insane," I breathed. "They'd never. Wouldn't they?" Thomas interrupted. "Governments have done worse. To indigenous people. To anyone they see as a threat. The Tsek are intelligent, powerful, and they live on land that contains billions of dollars in resources. Timber, minerals, oil. As long as they exist, that land is protected. But if they disappear..." He didn't need to finish. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Because you saw it," Thomas said. "You're the only civilian who got close enough to photograph the gathering. And more importantly, you're asking questions. That makes you valuable." "Valuable to who?" "To us. To the people trying to stop this. There are others." "A few. Researchers who worked with the Tsek and refused to go along with the military's plans. Indigenous leaders who've been allied with the Tsek for generations. and a handful of government officials who still have a conscience. He paused. We have evidence, documents, testimonies, proof of what's being planned. But we need more. We need someone who saw it firsthand. Someone who can testify. They'll destroy me, I said. They've already grounded me. If I talk, they'll destroy you anyway, Thomas said bluntly. You think they're going to give you your license back? Your plane? They'll drag out that safety review 4 years. And if you keep quiet, you'll spend the rest of your life wondering if you could have stopped a genocide. The word hung in the air. Genocide. I thought about those creatures standing in the forest. The intelligence in their eyes. The carved wood they'd given Pritchard. The organized council in the valley. People. Not animals. People. What do you need me to do? I asked. Thomas laid it out. There was going to be a hearing, a closed-door session in Ottawa with senior officials from National Defense, SIZE, and the Prime Minister's office. The military was pushing for authorization to neutralize the TSX threat. The opposition was trying to block it. We need someone to testify before that hearing, Thomas said. Someone credible. A civilian pilot with no political agenda. Someone who saw the gathering with their own eyes. They'll never let me in that room. They won't have a choice. We have allies. Members of Parliament who are demanding transparency. If we can get your testimony on record, even just a written statement, it'll be enough to stall the operation. And if we can stall it, we can expose it. And then what? Then public pressure does the rest. Once people know that an intelligent species exists and the government is planning to exterminate them, there's no putting that back in the box. It sounded insane. It sounded impossible. But what choice did I have? When? I asked. The hearing is in 6 days. October 1st. We'll get you to Ottawa. You'll submit a written testimony. And if they try to stop you, we'll leak everything to the press. They'll say I'm lying, that I'm mentally unstable. Probably, Thomas admitted. But we have other evidence. Other witnesses. You're just the spark. We'll provide the fire. I took a long breath. Okay, I said. I'm in. Thomas nodded, standing. Good. Someone will contact you in 2 days with travel arrangements. In the meantime, lay low. Don't use your phone. Don't talk to anyone. And for God's sake, don't let them know you're working with us. He moved toward the door, then stopped. One more thing, he said. The TSX know what you did. They know you saw them. And they're grateful. How do you? Because they told me, Thomas said. I'm one of the few humans they still trust. And they wanted me to give you this. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small object wrapped in cloth. I unwrapped it carefully. It was a carving. Wood, intricate, covered in symbols I didn't recognize. A human figure standing beside a much larger figure, one of the TSX, both with their hands raised in what looked like a gesture of peace. They made this for you, Thomas said. To thank you. And to remind you that some things are worth risking everything for. He left. I sat alone with the carving, turning it over in my hands, feeling the weight of what I'd just agreed to. 6 days. 6 days to prepare testimony that could save an entire species. Or get me killed trying. The next 2 days were the longest of my life. I stayed in my cabin, blinds drawn, jumping at every sound. I didn't use my phone. Didn't check email. Didn't even turn on the radio. Thomas had said to lay low, and I took that seriously. On the morning of September 26th, a beat-up Ford pickup pulled into my driveway. The driver was a young man, maybe 25, with Carrier Nation features and nervous eyes. Marcus Reed? He asked through the window. Yeah. Thomas sent me. We need to go. Now. I grabbed the bag I'd packed, clothes, documents, the carving, and climbed in. We drove south for 6 hours, barely speaking, until we reached Prince George. There, I was transferred to another vehicle, a nondescript sedan driven by an older woman who introduced herself only as Catherine. She was white, professional, and clearly not military or indigenous. "I'm a parliamentary aide," she explained as we merged onto the highway toward Alberta. "I work for an MP who's been trying to investigate Project Cascadia for 3 years. What you saw is the breakthrough we've been waiting for." "What happens when we get to Ottawa?" I asked. "You'll be briefed by our legal team. We'll prepare your written testimony and coordinate with sympathetic committee members to get it entered into the official record. The hearing is technically closed, but there are procedures for introducing new evidence, especially from civilian witnesses." "And if they refuse?" Catherine's jaw tightened. "Then we go public. We've got a journalist standing by, CBC, credible, with a history of investigative work. If the government tries to suppress your testimony, we leak everything. The satellite photos, the budget documents, witness statements from researchers, indigenous testimonies. All of it. That'll destroy my life." "Probably," she said. "But it'll save theirs." I looked out the window at the endless forests rolling past and thought about the TSEC, standing in that valley. About the intelligence in their eyes. About the carved gift they'd sent me. "Then let's make it count," I said. We arrived in Ottawa on September 29th, 2 days before the hearing. Catherine took me to a small apartment in a residential neighborhood far from Parliament Hill. A safe house, she called it. There, I met the rest of the team. There were 5 of them, 2 MPs, a constitutional lawyer, an anthropologist who'd worked with the TSEC in the 1980s, and Thomas, who'd flown in separately. The lawyer, a sharp-eyed man named David Brennan, got straight to business. "Your testimony needs to be precise, factual, and impossible to dismiss as delusion," he said, spreading documents across the kitchen table. "We'll structure it in 3 parts. What you saw, what you were told by government personnel, and what actions were taken against you afterward. No speculation. No emotion. Just facts." For the next 36 hours, we worked. I wrote and rewrote my statement a dozen times, refining every sentence, corroborating every detail with flight logs, GPS data, and Thomas's historical records. The anthropologist, Dr. Aaron Westbrook, provided context about TSEC culture and their long history of peaceful coexistence with indigenous peoples. "The key," David said, "is to frame this not as a cryptozoology story, but as an indigenous rights issue. The TSEC are an intelligent, culturally distinct people who've lived on this land for millennia. Under international law, they have the same rights as any indigenous population, including protection from genocide." "Will that actually work?" I asked. "It has to," one of the MPs, a woman named Helen Moreau, replied. "Because if we let the military kill them, we're no different than the governments that committed residential school atrocities or forced relocations. This is Canada's chance to do the right thing. For once." The conviction in her voice made me believe it was possible. October 1st arrived cold and gray. The hearing was scheduled for 9 a.m. in a secure conference room inside the Langevin block, just steps from Parliament Hill. David had managed to get my testimony admitted as supplemental evidence from a civilian contractor, which meant it would be entered into the official record, but I wouldn't be allowed in the room. "It's the best we can do," he said as we stood outside the building. "They're terrified of letting you testify in person. Too much risk that you'll say something they can't control." So what now? Now we wait. The committee will review your statement along with everything else. If they vote to halt the military operation, we win. If they authorize it, he trailed off. "Then we go public." "Then we go public," he confirmed. I handed him the folder containing my testimony, 23 pages of single-spaced text, maps, photographs, recreated from memory, and sworn affidavits. "Make them listen," I said. David nodded and disappeared into the building. The rest of us waited in a cafe across the street. Me, Thomas, Helen, and Catherine. No one spoke much. We just drank bad coffee and watched the clock. At 11:47 a.m., David's phone rang. He answered, listened, then closed his eyes. "They rejected it," he said quietly. My heart sank. "The committee chair ruled that your testimony is unsubstantiated hearsay, and inadmissible without corroborating physical evidence, which, of course, was confiscated. They're moving forward with the vote. When? Helen asked. 30 minutes. Thomas slammed his fist on the table. So that's it? They just ignore everything. Not everything, David said, looking at Catherine. Is your journalist ready? She nodded. One phone call. Then make it. We're going public. Within 2 hours, the story broke. CBC News led with it. Classified documents reveal government plan to exterminate hidden indigenous species. The article included everything: satellite photos of the valley gathering, declassified documents about Project Cascadia, budget breakdown showing millions spent on TSX containment, testimonies from Dr. Westbrook and indigenous leaders, and my full written statement. By 3 p.m., it was the top story in Canada. By 6 p.m., international outlets were picking it up. By midnight, it was global. Sasquatch Peace Summit targeted by military strike, BBC. Canada's secret war against cryptid population, The Guardian. Are Bigfoot real? And is the government trying to kill them? New York Times. The internet exploded. Reddit threads, conspiracy forums, indigenous advocacy groups, environmentalists, cryptozoologists, everyone had an opinion. Some called it the greatest hoax of the century. Others called it the greatest cover-up. But the evidence was there. The documents were real. The satellite photos were real. The testimonies were consistent. And the government couldn't make it go away. On October 3rd, the Prime Minister's office released a statement. It was carefully worded, non-committal, and infuriating. The Government of Canada takes all allegations regarding the treatment of vulnerable populations seriously. We are launching an independent review of the claims made in recent media reports. Until that review is complete, all related military operations have been suspended. Suspended. Not cancelled. Suspended. It's a stalling tactic, David said. They're hoping public attention dies down so they can restart quietly in 6 months. Will it work? I asked. Not if we keep the pressure on. And we did. Helen and 2 other MPs demanded a public inquiry. Indigenous groups filed lawsuits demanding recognition of TSX sovereignty. Environmental organizations called for the protection of their habitats. Scientists, real ones, from universities, started publishing papers about the implications of a hidden hominid species. The momentum was unstoppable. By mid-October, the government caved. They announced the creation of the TSX Protection Act, emergency legislation recognizing the TSX as an indigenous people with full legal rights, establishing protected reserves in their traditional territories, and criminalizing any attempts to harm, capture, or exploit them. It passed Parliament on October 29, 2001. The TSX were safe. For now. I never got my pilot's license back. Despite the public victory, the government never admitted wrongdoing. My safety review remained open indefinitely. My plane was returned, but only after being stripped of half its instruments. And my name was quietly added to a watch list that made sure I'd never work as a commercial pilot again. I was grounded. Permanently. But I wasn't destroyed. The publicity brought opportunities. I wrote a book about my experience. It became a bestseller in Canada and sparked a whole genre of TSX literature. I gave talks at universities, consulted on documentaries, worked with indigenous groups to promote awareness. I found a new purpose. And more importantly, I found peace. It's 2024 now. I'm sitting on the porch of a cabin in the Yukon, not my old one in Fort Nelson, but close enough. The world has changed a lot since that flight in 2001. The TSX are no longer a secret. They're protected, studied, respectfully, and slowly integrating into the edges of human society on their own terms. There are TSX liaisons who work with Parks Canada. TSX representatives who attend UN Indigenous Councils. Even a few TSX artists whose work has been displayed in museums. They're not hiding anymore. And the world is better for it. Last week, I received a package. No return address. Inside was another. Carving, larger than the first, more intricate. It showed the same two figures, human and TSX, but this time they were surrounded by others. A whole community. Standing together. There was a note, written in careful English. Thank you for seeing us. Thank you for speaking. The old ones remember. The young ones will not forget. You gave us a future. It wasn't signed, but I knew who it was from. I keep both carvings on my mantle now, next to a photo of my old beaver, the plane I'll never fly again. Some days I miss it. The freedom. The silence of the sky. The feeling of being untethered from the ground. But then I look at those carvings, and I remember what I gave it up for. Not for fame. Not for money. For the simple, radical idea that some things matter more than convenience. More than secrecy. More than fear. I gave up flying so that an entire people could keep walking the earth. And I'd make that choice again. Every single time. People ask me sometimes if I regret it. Taking those photos. Breaking the rules. Losing everything I'd built. And the answer is always the same. No. Because I've learned something in the 23 years since that flight. The world is full of quiet zones. Places we're told not to go, questions we're told not to ask, truths we're told not to see. And most of us respect those boundaries our whole lives. We stay in our lanes. We follow the rules. We trust that someone else is handling the hard decisions. But sometimes, you stumble into a quiet zone by accident. And when you do, you have a choice. You can look away, pretend you didn't see, and go back to your comfortable life. Or you can look closer. You can ask why those boundaries exist. You can question who benefits from the silence. I looked closer. And what I saw changed everything. Not just for me. Not just for the TSX. But for everyone who came after. Because now we know, the world is stranger, richer, more full of wonder than we ever imagined. And the only thing standing between us and that wonder is our willingness to see it. So here's my advice, for what it's worth. If you ever fly over something you're not supposed to see, don't look away. Take the photo. Tell the truth. And accept the cost. Because some secrets are meant to be revealed. Some silences are meant to be broken. And some truths are worth losing everything for. My name is Marcus Reed. I haven't flown a plane in 23 years. But I've never regretted the flight that grounded me. Because on September 14, 2001, I saw something impossible. And I made sure the world saw it too.